For decades, these massive lines in the Peruvian desert have been called an ancient UFO airport. From above, you can see why. Some run straight across the pampa for kilometers, pale strips cutting through dark desert like modern runways. Then the camera drops to the ground, and the runway idea hits the soil itself. These lines were not paved or cut as deep trenches. Their makers cleared away dark, iron oxide-coated surface stones, exposing lighter soil beneath. Not concrete, not compacted landing ground, just a shallow color change across an extremely fragile desert skin. A heavy landing should leave damage, crushing, displacement, scars, disturbed edges. Archaeology does not find that here, so the first clue is also the first boundary, not a runway. If humans made these enormous marks by altering only the surface of one of the driest deserts on Earth, what kind of human system were they building? So before any theory gets a verdict, the claims have to be separated. Start with what is known. The marks are real. People made them by moving stones across the desert surface. And the same dry, stable pampa that makes them look almost impossible also helped them survive. Other things are inferred. If a line shows repeated wear, we can ask whether people walked it in ceremony. If a figure faces a mountain, valley, or source of water, we can test whether that placement mattered. If an alignment points toward a rising or setting body in the sky, we can measure it, then ask whether it was intentional, common, or only one part of a larger pattern. Then there is speculation. The UFO airport, the buried monster seal, the one dramatic answer that claims to unlock every mark. Those ideas deserve testing, not mockery. And the first test is physical. What would they leave behind, and what would the ground have to show? The question is no longer whether the Nazca lines are mysterious. They are. The question is what kind of mystery the evidence allows. The strongest clues do not point upward to spacecraft or downward to trapped monsters. They point across the landscape, toward movement, water, ritual, social memory, and the problem of living at enormous scale in southern Peru. To understand those clues, the map has to become more than empty desert. It has to become a place where people lived under pressure. The lines belong to the Nazca culture of southern Peru, which flourished roughly between 500 BCE and 500 CE, long before the Inca Empire. They farmed, traded, made finely painted ceramics and textiles, and built their world in and around the Rio Grande de Nazca drainage basin, a system of valleys cut through one of the driest landscapes on Earth. Here, water was not background scenery. It decided whether fields, settlements, and ceremonies could exist at all. Rainfall on the pampa itself could be almost absent. Rivers might flow strongly in one season and shrink or vanish in another. Fields depended on water moving down from the Andes, on river channels, on underground aquifers, and on communities knowing where moisture could be found, stored, reached, or ritually summoned. That is why setting matters. A mountain was not just scenery if it fed a river. A valley was not just a route if it held farmland. An underground source was not just geology if it kept a settlement alive. Practical knowledge and sacred meaning could occupy the same ground. The geoglyphs were not all the same kind of mark. Some are long, straight lines, some are trapezoids, triangles, spirals, and other geometric forms. Others become living shapes, the spider, hummingbird, monkey, condor, plants, and figures whose meanings are still debated. Their survival is part of the evidence. The same hyper-arid, stable surface that made life difficult helped preserve shallow marks for centuries. Little rain washed them away. Low disturbance left the desert pavement in place. Before asking what the lines meant, we have to ask how enormous images could be made on a surface this fragile. Not by machines or deep carving, but by changing the skin of the desert itself. Up close, the desert skin explains the trick. The Nazca lines were not built upward like roads or cut down as deep trenches. They were made by rearranging what was already there. Across the pampa, the surface is covered with dark stones, many stained by iron oxides into a brown-black desert pavement. Move those stones aside, and a paler layer appears beneath. Lighter, clay-rich soil, gypsum, and compacted earth that catches the sun differently. From the ground, it can look modest, like a cleared strip or a change in texture. From higher slopes, and especially from the air, that small contrast becomes geometry. This is the strange engineering of Nazca, making monuments by taking material away. A line could be created by clearing stones from a path. A trapezoid could be formed by widening that cleared surface across the plane. A figure could be plotted at enormous scale, then made visible by exposing lighter ground inside or along its outline. The method also explains the survival. In a wetter place, rain would blur the exposed surface, move sediment, and soften edges. Here, the hyper-arid climate helped lock the marks in place because almost nothing disturbed them. But that preservation is fragile. The lines are shallow surface features, not paved, reinforced, or engineered to carry weight. A vehicle crossing the pampa can scar it by crushing or displacing the same desert pavement that makes the lines readable. Now the runway idea has to pass a physical checklist. Paved surface? No. Deep construction? No. Evidence of repeated heavy landings? No. What remains is a monumental image system made from delicate changes in stone and soil. Yet for serious researchers, the view from above still mattered. If these marks were not infrastructure, why did some early interpreters look to the sky for their meaning? That question brought one of the most important modern figures in the story onto the pampa with a notebook, measuring tools, and decades of patience. Maria Rieke was a German mathematician who became inseparable from the Nazca lines. Beginning in the mid-20th century, she helped document them, map them, explain them to the outside world, and fight for their protection when many marks were still vulnerable to roads, vehicles, and neglect. Before any theory could be tested, Rieke's work made the site legible. To study a landscape this large, someone had to turn scattered desert marks into a record. Straight lines measured, figures traced, orientations compared, damage noticed, boundaries argued for. Rieke helped make the Nazca lines visible not just from the air, but as a cultural monument that could be lost. Her interpretation looked upward. She argued that many lines and figures formed an astronomical calendar, with certain directions marking positions of the sun, stars, or seasonal events. In that view, the desert became an instrument, geometry on the ground used to track order in the sky. It was a serious attempt to answer a real problem. In an agricultural society with fragile water supplies, seasons mattered. Planting, rain, river flow, and ritual could not be separated neatly from observations of the heavens. So the idea that some lines had astronomical meaning belongs inside the evidence discussion. But it does not have to carry the whole site. Later surveys and statistical studies made the picture harder to reduce to one sky map. Some alignments may be meaningful, but many lines do not fit a clean astronomical pattern. The complex includes straight paths, trapezoids, spirals, animal and plant forms, and repeated clusters pointing in more than one direction. That is how legitimate explanations evolve. Rieke's astronomy theory helped preserve the lines and gave researchers a framework to test. Modern archaeology has kept the part that still has value, while letting go of the claim that one calendar explains everything. Astronomy stays on the evidence board, but with a smaller label, partial, not total. Then the question shifts. Maybe the crucial perspective was not only the sky above the pampa, maybe it was the human body moving across it. From the air, a Nazca line looks like a mark on a map. From the ground, it becomes a pale corridor underfoot, bordered by darker stones stretching toward a horizon you cannot reach all at once. That ground-level view matters because some parts of the complex show evidence consistent with repeated human movement. Researchers have examined not only the shape of the lines, but wear on surfaces, displaced stones, and the way certain paths can be followed physically across the pampa. The evidence does not turn every geoglyph into a road, but it suggests that at least some lines were not passive pictures waiting for an airborne viewer. They were places people moved through. A long straight line could organize a procession. A trapezoid could gather people at one end and narrow their movement toward another. A spiral could make the body turn inward and outward before returning to open desert. None of that tells us the exact words spoken, songs sung, or ritual performed. Archaeology cannot safely invent those details, but it can change the question. If people walked these markings repeatedly, meaning did not require seeing the whole design at once. Meaning could unfold through motion. The crunch of stones, the glare of the pampa, the slow approach to a mountain line, a valley edge, or a sacred point in the landscape. This is where the idea of an alien spectator loses more ground. The lines do not require a hovering viewer to be meaningful. Some may have been experienced as roots, not images, as actions, not symbols alone. And when those walked routes are traced across the map, they pull the investigation toward the places that mattered most in this desert: valleys, mountains, and hidden water beneath the surface. Beneath those possible routes is another map, one almost invisible from the air. In Nazca, water decided where crops could grow, where communities could endure, who could organize labor, and which places carried sacred force. A dry line across the pampa may look abstract to us, but in this basin, every valley, slope, riverbed, spring, and underground flow mattered. That is why the Puquios changed the investigation. These water systems, with underground channels, access shafts, and in some cases spiral openings cut into the earth, show that people in this region understood how to find, move, and maintain water in a landscape that gave almost none away. Their exact chronology can be debated in places, and not every feature belongs neatly to one moment, but the broader point is hard to miss. This was not a culture passively surviving the desert. It was engineering around it. When researchers compare line placements with valleys, aquifers, puquios, and ceremonial movement, some patterns look less random. Certain lines may have guided processions toward water-related places. Others may have marked relationships between dry ground, mountain sources, and the life that arrived downstream. In that reading, a geoglyph is not simply a picture. It is part of a lived landscape where walking, praying, farming, and managing scarcity could overlap. But this is where the story has to stay careful. This is not a hidden master code. The evidence does not allow us to say every line points to water, or that the whole pampa is one decoded map. The stronger conclusion is more human. The Nazca lines may belong to a ritual, practical world where survival and belief were not separate categories. Once that evidence is on the board, the modern myths start to look different, smaller than the thing they are trying to replace. Once the lines are allowed to be human, the modern myths lose some power, but not all of their appeal. The monster seal idea works because it takes the aerial shock of Nazca seriously. From above, these figures feel too large for ordinary categories. A spider stretched across the desert, a hummingbird drawn in one continuous sweep, a monkey with a curling tail, a condor spread like a sign meant for a world bigger than ours. It is easy to understand why modern imagination turns that into a locked prison, a warning, a seal over something buried. But the boundary is physical. Archaeology gives us scraped stones, exposed pale ground, walked surfaces, settlements, ceramics, textiles, water systems, and ritual landscapes. It does not give us physical evidence that the geoglyphs were built to imprison literal monsters under the pampa. What it gives us is quieter, and in some ways, stranger. Nazca art is full of charged beings, animals, plants, trophy heads, hybrid figures, mouths, eyes, serpentine forms, creatures associated by researchers with fertility, water, mountains, death, and transformation. The exact meaning of any one figure can be debated and should be, but the pattern is not empty decoration. These images came from a symbolic world where animals could carry environmental, social, and sacred force. The ancient alien story flattens that world into technology. The monster seal story flattens it into horror. Both offer one dramatic answer where the evidence points to a culture working across many layers at once, drawing on the earth, walking through space, watching the sky, managing water, and making visible beliefs we can only partly reconstruct. That may be why the myths keep returning. Nazca is too big, too precise, and too exposed to feel ordinary. Each age imports the mystery it already knows how to imagine. Runways in the age of aircraft, aliens in the space age, hidden monsters in the age of internet lore. But the Pampa does not need those additions to be unsettling. Its real power is that the marks are clear and unreadable. Human hands made them, human feet crossed them, human lives depended on the desert around them, and still the full sentence they were writing remains out of reach. So the evidence board does not end with one solved mystery. It ends with boundaries. The runway claim fails at the surface. These were not paved strips or compressed landing scars, but shallow removals of dark desert stones, exposing lighter ground that could be damaged by the force the theory requires. The monster seal claim fails differently. It has no archaeological footing. What Nazca does have is stranger and more specific. Animals, spirals, trapezoids, lines, and sacred images tied to water, fertility, death, mountains, movement, and transformation. The strongest picture is layered. Some marks were engineered by hand at the desert surface. Some appear to have been walked. Some may relate to water routes, aquifers, valleys, or ritual places. Some alignments may have watched the sky. Across all of it, the lines likely carried social and symbolic meanings that changed over centuries. No single key unlocks the whole Pampa. That is the real Nazca mystery, not whether something inhuman landed here, but how a human society turned scarcity, geometry, ritual, and landscape into a monument so large that we can see its shape clearly and still not fully read what it says. The past rarely gives us clean answers. More often it leaves clues, and at Nazca, those clues are written across the desert itself.